For the past 40 years, the definition of a personal computer has been static. Whether you were using a Windows Tower in the 90s, a gaming laptop in the 2000s, or a MacBook Pro just a few years ago, the engine inside was fundamentally the same. It was the x86 architecture, produced primarily by Intel and AMD. This standard dominated the industry because it offered one thing above all else: raw performance. It was the heavy lifter, the workhorse of the digital age. But today, we are witnessing the most significant architectural shift since the invention of the microchip. We see Apple completely abandoning Intel for their own silicon. We see Microsoft betting its future on Copilot Plus PCs powered by Qualcomm. We even see Amazon and Google building their own massive server chips. All of these new processors share the same DNA, and it is not x86, it is ARM. This isn't just a change in branding. It is a fundamental change in the language computers speak. We are moving from an era of unlimited power consumption to an era of efficiency first. To understand why this is happening now, we have to look at the core difference between the two philosophies, CISC versus RISC. Let's start with the incumbent, the giant that has ruled the world for decades, x86. This architecture is built on a philosophy called CISC, or Complex Instruction Set Computing. The logic behind CISC is to pack as much capability as possible into a single line of code. Ideally, a programmer can write one complex instruction, and the processor executes it. It sounds efficient in theory, right? But there is a hidden cost. To understand these complex commands, the processor needs complex physical circuitry called a decoder to break them down into smaller tasks the hardware can actually do. This means a significant portion of the silicon chip is dedicated just to translating instructions. This extra hardware requires more transistors, occupies more space, consumes more electricity, and, most importantly, generates a lot of heat. For decades, this didn't matter, because desktop computers were plugged into the wall and had large cooling fans. We accepted the heat and the noise as the price of performance. On the other side, we have the challenger, ARM. ARM stands for Advanced RISC Machine. This is built on RISC, or Reduced Instruction Set Computing. The philosophy here is the exact opposite. Instead of complex, heavy instructions, RISC uses simple, atomic commands. It breaks a complex task down into many small, fast steps. Because the instructions are so simple, the chip doesn't need a complex decoder. The hardware layout is cleaner, simpler, and much more streamlined. For a long time, the tech industry looked down on RISC. They believed it was too simple for real work. They thought it was only good for mobile phones and tablets, where battery life was more important than power. The assumption was always, x86 is for heavy lifting, ARM is for light tasks. But that assumption was shattered when engineers realized something crucial. If you take this efficient RISC architecture and scale it up, adding more cores, more memory bandwidth, and specialized units, you can achieve the same performance as x86, but with a fraction of the power usage. So why is the entire industry shifting now? Why didn't we switch 10 years ago? The answer lies in physics. We have hit the thermal wall. With x86, the only way to get more speed historically was to pump in more power and increase the clock speed. But we reached a point where chips were becoming too hot to handle. Laptops were throttling, fans were spinning like jet engines, and battery life was stagnating. You simply cannot push more electricity into a small chip without melting it. ARM offered an escape route. Because it doesn't have the complex legacy baggage of CISC, it runs naturally cooler. This allows chip designers to pack more transistors, more GPU cores, and dedicated AI processors onto the chip without overheating. In 2026, the metric for a good computer isn't just speed, it is performance per watt. And in that metric, ARM is currently winning. We are now in a transition period. The dominance of x86 is fading, not because it is slow, but because it is inefficient. The future of computing, from the laptop in your backpack to the data center in the cloud, is being rebuilt on ARM, but hardware is only half the battle. A fast chip is useless if it cannot run the software you need. In the next episode, we will discuss the biggest hurdle for this new generation: compatibility. How do you run old x86 Windows apps on a new ARM chip? What is translation, and does it slow you down? Now that we understand the hardware revolution, we face a much more difficult problem: the language barrier. You see, building a faster, more efficient chip like ARM is great, but a processor is useless if it cannot run the software you use every day. For 40 years, almost every piece of major software, from Microsoft Word to Adobe Photoshop to your favorite video games, was written in the language of x86. Think of x86 and ARM as two completely different spoken languages. x86 is like German, complex, precise, and structurally dense. ARM is like Spanish, streamlined, rhythmic, and efficient. If you take a program written in x86 German and try to run it on an ARM Spanish chip, the chip simply won't understand. It's gibberish. The program crashes instantly. This was the chicken and egg problem that killed previous attempts to switch architectures. No one bought ARM computers because there were no apps, and developers didn't write apps because there were no users. To solve this, the industry had to invent a magic trick called a translation layer, or emulator. This is a piece of software that sits in the middle. It takes the x86 instructions, translates them into ARM instructions in real time, and feeds them to the processor. The user shouldn't even know it's happening. Apple was the first to perfect this with Rosetta 2 inches when they launched the M1 chip. Rosetta was a masterpiece of engineering because it didn't just translate code while the app was running. It translated most of the app before you even opened it, during installation. This meant that old Intel apps ran on the new Apple Silicon almost as fast as if they were native. It bridged the gap overnight. On the Windows side, the journey was rockier. Early attempts at Windows on ARM were slow and buggy because the translation was inefficient. But with the release of Microsoft's new emulation engine, often referred to as Prism, and the sheer power of new Qualcomm chips, the gap has finally closed. Today, a Windows laptop running on ARM can run almost any old x86 executable file smoothly. The translation penalty, the slight loss of speed caused by the translation process, has become negligible for most users. However, translation is just a temporary bridge. The ultimate goal is native software. This is when developers rewrite their code specifically for ARM. When an app runs natively, it unlocks the full potential of the chip: zero translation delay, maximum battery life, and minimal heat. We are now seeing a massive wave of universal apps that include code for both architectures. The biggest software giants have already moved over. The browser you use, the streaming service you watch, and the operating system itself are now native to ARM. But there is still one final fortress that is hard to conquer: drivers and games. While general software translates well, low-level hardware drivers and complex anti-cheat systems in video games often need deep access to the specific hardware architecture. This is why some specialized equipment and competitive online games still struggle on the new platform. It is the last line of defense for the old x86 world. As we look at the landscape today, the software war is largely won. The compatibility layer is no longer a barrier, it is a safety net. We have reached a point where the average user can pick up an ARM-based laptop and not even realize they are part of a revolution. The software simply works. This seamless transition has paved the way for the final stage of this takeover: the complete reshaping of the ecosystem, where the lines between mobile, desktop, and server completely disappear. With the hardware barrier broken and the software bridge built, we arrive at the final destination of this revolution: the unified ecosystem. For decades, we lived in a divided world. You had your mobile device, which was efficient but weak, and your desktop computer, which was powerful but anchored to a wall. These two worlds never spoke the same language. They used different chips, different operating systems, and different apps. But the shift to ARM has erased this line completely. Today, the chip inside a high-end tablet is virtually identical to the chip inside a professional laptop. This means developers no longer have to choose between making a mobile app or making a desktop program. They can write code once, and it runs natively everywhere. We are seeing the birth of a device that can be your phone in your pocket, your tablet on the couch, and your desktop workstation when docked. The concept of computer is no longer defined by its shape, but by its capability. This unification extends far beyond consumer gadgets. The biggest battlefield for ARM isn't in your backpack, it's in the cloud. Data centers, the massive server farms that power the internet, are the largest consumers of electricity on the planet. For companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, the transition from x86 to ARM isn't just about performance, it's about survival. By switching to ARM-based servers, they cut their electricity bills by millions of dollars and reduce their carbon footprint significantly. The internet itself is quietly migrating to this new architecture. So where does this leave the old king, x86? Is Intel dead? Is AMD finished? Not exactly. History tells us that legacy technologies don't vanish overnight. They just become niche. x86 will likely become the diesel engine of computing. It will remain in heavy industries, legacy enterprise systems, and extreme performance gaming rigs where power consumption is irrelevant. It will be the workhorse for specific tasks, but it will no longer be the standard for the mass market. Intel and AMD know this. That is why we see them scrambling to simplify x86, trying to strip away decades of bloat to make it behave more like ARM. They are fighting a defensive war, trying to hold onto a shrinking territory. But the momentum is undeniable. The industry has tasted efficiency, and it refuses to go back to the gluttonous power consumption of the past. We are entering a new era of computing, an era where performance is measured not by how fast you can go, but by how far you can go on a single charge. An era where your device is always on, always connected, and instantly responsive, just like your phone. The architecture war is effectively over. The complex giant has been dethroned by the efficient swarm. And for us, the users, the future is cooler, quieter, and faster than ever before.